In the early 2010s, a category of films popped up that Disney accidentally created, a category I like to call the failed next big thing. These are movies that Disney dumped a lot of money and advertising into in order to start a new film franchise. And with most of these films, it was trying to recapture the magic and success that the Pirates of the Caribbean films captured. There's tons of these films that were pushed everywhere in the hopes that they would catch on, but when audiences didn't really react, they were tossed away, never to be thought of again. At one point, Disney was trying everything in their power to make these films happen, but once they failed, they tried everything in their power to make us forget. This is the third installment of this series, so check out my other videos about 2013's The Lone Ranger and 2015's Tomorrowland. Links are in the description and on screen. However, for today's video, we are focusing on 2010's The Sorcerer's Apprentice. So let's take a look at this forgotten failure and try to understand why it never clicked with audiences. The concept for this film actually originated from Nicolas Cage, who had the simple idea of wanting to play a sorcerer in a movie. He brought up this idea to producer Todd Garner, who suggested they could take the Sorcerer's Apprentice segment from the film Fantasia and expand it into a feature-length film. Fantasia is an iconic early Disney film that features an anthology of different animated scenes set to classical music. One of the most iconic vignettes in this film features Mickey Mouse as the apprentice of the sorcerer Yen Sid, as he uses magic to try and get chores done, but it ends up backfiring on him. So this idea was taken and brought to big-time producer Jerry Bruckheimer, who Cage had worked with several times in the past. Since Bruckheimer had a past with Disney, having worked on the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, he was able to get the project greenlit with the company. Director Jon Turteltaub was then brought on to the project, who had also worked with Cage in the National Treasure franchise. Jay Baruchel was slated to star in the film with Alfred Molina as the villain, and in 2009, the film went into production. This retelling of the classic story took place in New York City in the modern day, so a large portion of the film was shot on location in the city. The filmmakers also made sure to focus a lot on practical effects so that the magic looked more believable. This did make the film look better, but at the same time it also increased the budget. For the most part, filming was uneventful and went by quick, except for when the set ran into trouble on May 4th of 2009, when a Ferrari that was being filmed in a chase sequence lost control and ran into a restaurant in Times Square. 2 pedestrians were injured in the accident. However, in this behind-the-scenes video, it's alleged that this particular pedestrian that was hit by the pole was actually faking it. Either way, it was reported that both pedestrians walked away with minor injuries. The film debuted on July 14th, 2010. In its opening weekend, it came in third at the box office with a $17 million gross. It grossed a total of $63 million in the US during its entire box office run and $151 million worldwide for a combined total of $215 million. This may sound like a lot, but you have to consider that the budget of this film was $150 million, not including marketing. Most films have to double their budget in order to break even, which this film did not do, unfortunately. This means that the sequel that was teased at the end credits was never followed up on, and this film was quietly tucked away. Not enough people showed up in the theater to give this film the support it needed, which of course begs the question of what went wrong.
You speak Mandarin.
I believe the biggest problem this film had was tough competition at the theater. The release for The Sorcerer's Apprentice was just poor timing, as it debuted 1 week after the first Despicable Me movie came out. At the time, it was hard to predict what the reaction to Despicable Me would be, but I'm sure no one expected it to be such a box office smash that it was, as it grossed over $500 million in its entire box office run and led to countless sequels and spin-offs that we are still getting today. But the most important part is that Despicable Me swept up the intended audience that The Sorcerer's Apprentice was trying to pull. The Sorcerer's Apprentice was also entirely buried by the release of Inception, which also debuted a few days before, and was the movie that everyone was talking about. As I stated earlier, The Sorcerer's Apprentice debuted at number 3 at the box office, and these 2 films were the ones that were ahead of it. Not to mention, Toy Story 3, The Twilight Saga Eclipse, and The Last Airbender were still all showing in theaters. I mean, The Sorcerer's Apprentice really did not have a chance. Perhaps another factor in the film's failure at the box office was the casting choices of the leads. The intended audience for this film is kids, but our main protagonist is a 20-year-old in college who is played by a 27-year-old Jay Baruchel. I think Jay Baruchel is a great actor, but the type of character he plays doesn't really work in this film. Raunchy comedies seem to be his bread and butter, and seeing him play the lead in an action-adventure family film, he just felt really out of his element. I know he's had success as Hiccup in the How to Train Your Dragon series, but voice acting is a whole nother world. If you want to transport the audience to a world of magic and wonder, kids have to see themselves in the characters on screen, and they won't be able to relate to a college student and his struggles. The opening of this film has a flashback scene of our main protagonist at 10 years old, and I think if the film would have stayed in that age range, maybe it could have been a better hit with their intended audience. But then again, it also could have just been compared even more to the franchises like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, which is another problem with this film. This movie was largely trying to capitalize on the wizards and magic craze that Harry Potter had been riding for years. In some ways, this film was Disney's response to Warner Brothers, who was milking their cash cow in the Harry Potter series. In a span of 10 years between 2001 and 2011, Warner Brothers put out 8 Harry Potter films that all dominated at the box office. The Sorcerer's Apprentice was a pretty weak response to Harry Potter because although it's based on an established IP, it's nowhere near as popular as the Harry Potter books are. And after seeing 8 movies about magic and wizards, the average theater goer was pretty burnt out on the fantasy genre. They won't want to commit to an entirely new magic-based franchise after giving so much time and money to Harry Potter. But that's just my theory. Also, to circle back on the casting choices, I want to say that Nicolas Cage is a phenomenal actor, but he didn't quite work for this film's image either. Cage has led big blockbusters in the past, but right around the time this film came out, he was rebranding his image to smaller budget, weird, artsy roles that he's more known for nowadays. I think having these two actors as the leads made this film a bit difficult to market to their intended audience of kids and had a blow on this film's potential box office. And of course, the poor reviews from critics and audiences had another blow to this film's box office and legacy. It has a 40% critic and a 53 audience score on Rotten Tomatoes and a 2.6 on Letterboxd. The general consensus is that this film is mid. However, I'd like to give my 2 cents on the film. Yeah, I agree with the general consensus on this one. It's mid. This is yet another Disney film that lands in the category of passable. Just like my thoughts on Tomorrowland, it's not the worst movie in the world, but it's also not good. I was really digging the first act, but as the film went on, it just felt like it was running on autopilot. This is because the second act pretty much just treads water the entire time. The whole film revolves around 2 different pairs of wizards who are trying to get a hold of a magical doll that contains an evil witch who can destroy the world. This worked for the first act because both pairs were racing against each other to try to find this object. But at the end of the first act, our main characters get their hands on it, which means the momentum of the plot just halts. We then spend the next 30 minutes with our main character as he trains to be a wizard and tries to woo the love interest, while the main villains just make plans in the background. This is where the movie really dips in quality, because there's no forward momentum in the plot. It feels like the movie is just buying time until something interesting happens. And by the time something does happen, the plot just repeats itself as the heroes and villains fight over the doll again. For a movie that has 5 different writers credited, the actual script is pretty basic. It's so simple and predictable, hitting all the beats that you would expect from a family adventure movie. There's nothing that separates this film from the others in the genre, and it really blends in with the crowd. The main emotional climax of the film and the key to Dave's character arc is his relationship with Becky, but this whole romance subplot feels very rushed and half-assed. We are meant to care about their relationship, but the film never gives us any reasons to. It seems like this romance plot was just thrown in to broaden the film's appeal, since every blockbuster is required by law to have a romance subplot for some reason. Also, the comedy in this movie did not work for me. There were a lot of jokes in this movie that were just painful, and the dialogue overall was pretty cliche, especially the dialogue surrounding the romance plot. The plot and script is the weakest link in this film, as the performances and action set pieces are pretty fun and entertaining. These were my favorite aspects of the movie. The film has a lot of practical effects that look super good, and many of the spells used were pretty creative. Although the CGI was rough in a few spots, such as the dragon fight, I'd say it was solid for the most part. I know I said that the casting of the leads was a poor decision, but that's just on the marketing side. I actually really liked Nicolas Cage and Jay Baruchel in this movie, as they gave commendable performances as our main leads and seemed to have pretty good chemistry on screen. Alfred Molina is also a blast to watch as the main villain, as he is chewing the scenery and having fun. And even the great Rowley Jefferson has a cameo in the film.
Don't call me. Don't come by my house. We're done.
The film has its flaws, but I don't think it deserved to crash and burn as badly as it did. But then again, when you have a budget of $150 million, you have to be a hit in order to make some money. And that's $150 million in 2010, by the way. Adjusted for inflation, that budget would now be over $200 million. Just like Tomorrowland and The Lone Ranger, this film had potential to be great, but it dropped the ball and ended up blending in with the crowd of other failed Disney products. However, I was actually able to watch this movie on Disney Plus, which was nice since Tomorrowland and The Lone Ranger are only available to rent on Amazon, which I'm still mad about, by the way. There was great effort put into this film to create the next big thing, but tough competition at the box office, hard to market stars, and audiences growing burnt out on the fantasy genre led to this film bombing, which is a shame because I know there's quite a few fans of this movie out there who would love to see a sequel. But it didn't quite make enough money for the mouse to give it the go-ahead. So that's the story of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Disney's failed next big thing. What do you think of the film? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. This has been Tom from Eisenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. See you next week.